All right, Jake Stewart here today. I'm joined today by Nick Coit, Rhode Island Sportscaster of the Year. Nick, thank you so much for being here today.
Jake, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I wanted to start off by asking you a few questions, and I wanted to take a deep dive here first into you and your background, Nick. So, can you tell me a little bit about what you brought you into the industry and talk a little bit about yourself a little bit?
Wow. So what brought me into the industry is I grew up. I was a big theater person, but I was also a big sports fan. And I grew up, obviously, when you grow up in New England, you grow up in the South Shore of Massachusetts. You follow the Red Sox, and they broke the curse when I was growing up, and the Patriots and Tom Brady and the miraculous Super Bowls and all that, the Celtics, the Bruins, whatever. And I took that passion, and I mentioned the theater thing because that was just something that I really enjoyed doing. I was a big time performer, and I was like, okay, how do I take those two talents and put them together? And sportscasting just seemed like the perfect mix of those two things. My old professor at Emerson College, John Rook, used to call it infotainment, and I felt like I could entertain while also putting out information and telling great stories. And that's sort of what got me into the industry, was those two passions. Like I said, I'm a South Shore guy from Plymouth, Mass. So, sports is just, it's a thing here in New England. And, and now working and living only an hour away in Rhode Island from my home. It's just the passion is even deeper here.
That's awesome. It sounds like you really do have a lot of experience on multiple big stages, the theater and the sports stage as well. I remember looking up your background, and I know you played baseball at one point too, right? As well. And also, I believe you were in the marching band too.
I was. Wow, you really did do your research. I played baseball into college. I played at Emerson, made some great lifelong friends there. The game was just so good to me. I wasn't the best player on the team, never was, but I really enjoyed it. Like I said, that sort of fueled my passion, a little bit. And same with marching band. That was one of the first tastes I got. So I went to Emerson College, but I was in the marching band over at Boston College, which was across the city in Boston. And it was sort of like taking another class, but it was a different environment over there, different school, but they were very welcoming. And it was my first taste of college sports, because I wasn't really a huge college sports guy growing up because the professional teams are so big here. But getting to see, some of the great, football games, and I saw Matt Ryan play in college, obviously a pretty good quarterback after his time at BC, and at BC, of course. That was my first taste of that. And then doing pep band there too. I get to see, when you're in the ACC, you see Duke and North Carolina and all those teams come through. And that was really cool too. And up here, college hockey is a huge, huge deal. So a lot of BCBU games, and, now I get to cover Providence College, doing my job here in Rhode Island, and they've won a national championship since I've been here too. So it was a really great taste of that. It really helped me appreciate the college sports that we cover now.
I love that. I love your versatility within the industry and outside of the industry, and talking about big games and big events. Nick, what's the biggest event you've covered, or what would you say is the best one you've been able to cover in your time?
Ooh, so I would answer both of those differently, Jake, because I think the biggest we've covered. I've been very fortunate in my 7.5 years at the station. We've covered 4 Super Bowls.
Wow.
Each one of them was, different in their own way. It's funny. People will ask, like, what's the best game you've ever been to? And I always say, especially with the Patriots, it was Super Bowl 49, the Patriots and the Seahawks, and Malcolm Butler, the interception at the end. And people immediately will respond to that, especially Patriots fans. Well, what about Super Bowl 51 with the Falcons? Because the big comeback. I say, well, that wasn't the best game I've ever been to. For 3 quarters, it was horrible. It was 28-3. And then what happens. So may have been one of the best stories that we've ever covered. And so it was very different there. And then there's other stories along the way. I mentioned Providence College, the hockey team winning the national championship. That's one of the best stories I've ever covered. And I put that near, if not at the top of the list, because of just how special it was locally. And to see some of those players now, I mean, that was a team that you're talking about, 8 or 9 guys reached the NHL. And so it was one of those stories that it was great at the time, but then it kept getting better and better as more guys reach the professional level. So there's been countless other stories. We talked about baseball, my passion, to be, on the field, the World Series in 2018 and covering the Red Sox in LA. That was a thrill. Covering the Bruins in the Stanley Cup final, that was a thrill. So we've been really fortunate, really lucky around here. The culture of sports in New England is just, it seems like it's never ending too, because the teams always stay competitive. So it's pretty cool.
That's fantastic, Nick. It's great to hear about, some piece of the Boston sports within you. I know I'm from Denver. I'm a big Broncos fan. So we had a little rivalry going on there for a little bit, but Manning Brady was definitely a lot of fun to watch. And I was able to watch you guys against the Rams a couple of years ago in the Super Bowl, and fun game, but not too much action like you mentioned in the Falcons game as well. But you guys ended up coming up on top. No surprise there. But on to my next question, Nick. Growing up, did you know you wanted to be a sports commentator? And also, what was your inspiration? What other commentators kind of led you to go down that path as a sportscaster?
So growing up, I don't think it really hit me until probably high school. And this is kind of a funny story. I tell this a lot. So when I was doing, theater in high school, it was kind of my thing. And there was an organization at my high school, Plymouth North High School, Plymouth, Mass, called Students Fostering Hope. And they put together different events, different charity events to raise money and, for different charities, local charities. And one of the events, this was I think it was my junior year of high school. So that would put it at 2005, 2006-ish. So the movie Dodgeball at the time was very popular, with Vince Vaughn and Ben Stiller, and just, funny movie. And so they had this idea, okay, why don't we do a dodgeball tournament at the high school to raise money? And so they got a bunch of kids, bunch of teams to sign up. And a couple of my friends from the organization said, hey, we want, like the movie with ESPN 8, The Ocho, we want a couple people to come in and be like commentators, like call the action. Would you be willing to do it? And I was like, well, that sounds like a blast. And so a buddy of mine, Sam Peck, and I, we took the microphones, and, for the whole time it was on like the PA system so everybody could hear us. And we were just having fun with it and just commentating. And the next day, Jake, I was walking around school, and 3 separate occasions, I had teachers come up to me and say, you were really good at that. You might want to look into doing that. And a light bulb went off in my head, and it was like, wow, I think this could be something I would want to do. And especially with the passion that I had for, the sports that I was playing too. So that was the moment that I think I realized I wanted to do or get into sportscasting. And in terms of like inspirations, when you're in New England, you have so many great, sports commentators and play-by-play guys. And, I remember growing up and listening to Gil Santos call Patriots games and, freaking out when they've won their first Super Bowl 36 against the Rams. And Joe Castiglione's been on the radio forever calling Red Sox games. And, those are voices that I grew up with that, they're inspirations. And I've had a chance to meet, fortunately, some of them. And, there were some that I sort of looked at and I said, well, if I could have a career like theirs, I'd be a happy person.
That's awesome. I love that story. I think it's really unique. It's also hilarious, but I think
Right.
you hear it from a lot of journalists and people trying to come into the industry, breaking through. But I think that's an awesome story how you found that passion. just a great way to find it.
It's a little different. But hey, you know what? A Vince Vaughn movie, they're always good, right?
Right. So my next question for you, this one's a little bit kind of based on the times we've been going through recently, but in light of the pandemic and everything going on, how has that kind of changed the way that you've worked and changed the industry as a whole as well?
Well, there's been a lot, and some of it is what we're doing right now, talking virtually like this. We've really had to adjust. I'll never forget just that feeling in March 2020 when everything was shut down. And I think, my partner, my great partner at ABC6, Ian Steele, who's just he works hard behind the scenes. You don't see half the work that he does. And an honor like this, I want to make sure I shout him out, because an honor like this doesn't happen without a great partner like, Ian Steele, my guy. But yeah, I remember sitting in the office with him and we were talking about our sports coverage going forward. We're like, what are we going to do? Like, how are we supposed to do our jobs? There's no sports. Like, what are we going to do? And one of the biggest challenges, but empty feelings you've ever had. But, we sort of figured it out on the fly, and Zoom became a big thing and popular. And we started interviewing people virtually, and we figured it out. And that's half the battle when it comes to covering sports, and especially on a local level, is you figure out creative ways to do it, creative ways to tell stories. And we were able to do that. And I think some of it, I hope it sticks going forward, because being able to talk to somebody virtually like this, it can make things a little bit easier. I may not have to drive to the other end of the state to do an interview. Maybe I just hop on a Zoom link and do it for 10 minutes and we're all set. Like, that can happen. Or one of my favorite things that happened during the pandemic was, so Providence College, the Friars, Big East basketball is a big part of our local coverage area. And when I first came in 2014, one of the guys that was a star on their team was a guy named Bryce Cotton. And he had a big game, I think his last game as a Friar against North Carolina in the NCAA tournament, just a great guard. And he's over playing professionally in Australia now. And he plays over in Western Australia for the Perth Wildcats, I believe. And he's having all this success. And I reached out to him probably about June-ish, I think, 2020. And they said, hey, I'd love to catch up, love to do an interview, which I had done with a lot of our, former local stars. And he said, yeah, that'd be great. And it just blew me away, Jake, that he's on the other side of the world, literally the other side of the world. And all I had to do was send him a Zoom link and time it out, obviously, because what happened was we did the interview. It was 9:30 p.m. on the East Coast here. And that was a Wednesday night. And for him, it was 9:30 a.m. on Thursday. So it was just crazy that, like, the time difference, and all I had to do was send him a link. We join up, and literally you're talking to somebody on the other side of the world. I think that blows me away. And I hope that's something we do and continue to do going forward, because you can continue to tell great stories. And I don't have to fly to Western Australia to talk to the guy, which is great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love how, you're not dwelling on the negatives. You're able to look at some of the positives, and, that's a great story. I think that's something that a lot of people are looking over, the fact that we're able to have these conversations and not, drive across states or fly halfway across the country, like you said. And so, I agree. I think there's a lot of positives we can take from this, and some things I think that kind of leads me to my next question. But as far as the sports industry as a whole, what do you see coming out of COVID that we can take, as things that we can implement, that we can keep?
Yeah, I think some of this, I think some of the virtual interviews, I think that can save time. Like I said, like I think of, we have the International Tennis Hall of Fame in Rhode Island. And, I remember we did an interview one day where, driving through, summer traffic in Newport, Rhode Island, beautiful, beautiful place this time of year, but trying to do that for an interview that's 10 minutes long and might be a 30-second soundbite with the CEO, Todd Martin, who was a great player himself, that can be a hassle. So instead, I can call Todd. I did this a couple times last summer, and I said, hey, I'll send you a Zoom link. We'll do an interview. I'm in the office. We do it, and voila, it saves time. I think maybe like pregame press conferences, like I'm thinking like when we cover the Celtics or cover the Bruins, maybe pregame, or even the Red Sox, instead of having to get to the ballpark and fight through traffic in Boston to get to Fenway Park to talk to Alex Cora, maybe he just is in his office, opens his computer, and pregame, that's the conversation that you have, is virtually and via Zoom link. And then postgame, if you want to go back into locker rooms, if you want to, do a postgame press conference in person, I think that's appropriate. And that's obviously where you can get great stories, is being back in a locker room, which I do hope happens soon. But I think in some ways, I think the virtual thing can continue and help. And again, just the interviews that you get and do with people, are things that maybe you wouldn't have the opportunity to do before. I had the fortunate and just great pleasure this past summer. I ended up virtually interviewing Cal Ripken Jr., who, as a baseball fan growing up, and I get to talk to a guy who has a whole league, a whole level of youth baseball named after him. And obviously he's the Iron Man. But that's something that I would never think of or think to do or be able to do if it wasn't virtually, because he's in, another part of the country. I'm here in Rhode Island, like that was, but were able to interview him and for a story we were doing, and it was just a great thing. And so I hope that sort of thing continues, because I'd love to be able to have the mindset of, well, okay, maybe we can't interview this certain person or famous athlete or whatever, in person, but maybe we can do it virtually, and it would still have the same effect, and you'd still be able to tell great stories.
I agree. I think that the accessibility and as well as the comfortability for the athletes as well, I think it's just a big bonus of being able to have these conversations via Zoom instead of in person. And I think that's great. And kind of switching gears a little bit, this is my last question for you. Nick, thanks once again for being with me today, and for all your hard work that you've done in the past. That hearing about your stories and hearing about the experience you've had within the industry, as an aspiring, sportscaster one day myself, what advice would you give for someone like me?
Oh boy. Try everything. Be persistent, and just continue to have that drive and passion, and don't get discouraged if you ever hear no, because you're going to hear no. And, especially when you're first getting into the business, you may send out a lot of applications if you're getting into TV or getting into radio and whatnot. But all it takes is one person to believe in you. And all it takes is one person to say, hey, here's the door. Here's your door into the industry. You want to walk through it? Here it is. And I've been fortunate to have, my station. My first job was in Bangor, Maine, small market up there at WAVI TV5. And always fortunate for the opportunity that I had up there. And a guy named Tim Throckmorton, who was the sports director there for 30 plus years, a great veteran and a guy that knew TV so well. He believed in me. He believed that I could step into this industry and do this for a living. And I'm all forever grateful to him for that opportunity, because he helped open the door for me. I worked behind the scenes to start in the industry. I worked at Boston 25 in Boston, and they were great to me. Jay Bramble, Ryan Asalta, a couple of guys that I interned with, Walt McGraw, Jeff Robinson, guys I worked with. They believed that I could get into the industry. And I think it was the result of just, working hard and, again, being persistent. And if you do that, you can make an impression on somebody. And, I thank Ken Bell, who was the sports director at my station in Providence for, 35 years too, because he believed that I could come to this market in this state and tell great stories and cover all these great teams and games and all of that. And those are people that, again, I tried to work hard, and I think hard work goes a long way, and having a great work ethic and just passion. Passion is a huge thing when it comes to sports, because this can be as fun as it can be a tough industry, and it can be a tough job to do sometimes. But if you work hard at it and you continue to have that passion, that fire, that drive, I think you can, be successful in this business.
Passion and persistence. That's great. Two things that, I think a lot of us need to have more of. And I think it's great that you point that out. Once again, our 2020 Rhode Island Sportscaster of the Year, Nick Coit, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate it.